I want you to hold one fact in your mind before we get into this. The man being confirmed as America's next Secretary of Homeland Security sat across a table from a self-admitted Al-Qaeda affiliate. Not under pressure, not by accident. He flew there. He requested the meeting. He flew back and called it leadership. And today, inside a Senate confirmation hearing, a sitting U.S. Senator stood up and used that meeting as evidence that this man is ready to secure your borders. I'm not editorializing. That is the transcript. That is what was said on the record, with cameras rolling, under oath. What I'm about to break down is how a moment like that gets packaged as a credential, and why the fact that nobody in that room flinched is the most important part of this story.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Christy, for being here as well. Senator Mullen, I have to say, I'm just going to be blunt, very honest with you. I hope that the president is watching. I am going to say to the president, I am really upset that he has made your nomination. Why? Because I will be losing from the Senate one of the best friends that I have here, truly. But in that same accord, I am so grateful to the president for making your nomination to Department of Homeland Security. So we've had a lot of discussion here. I know, just as Senator Fetterman said, there are a lot of differences and opinions on the politics surrounding DHS. And Senator Fetterman mentioned that he grieves for all of those that we have lost, those protesters. We grieve the loss of young women, young men that we have seen at the hands of those that have migrated illegally into the United States of America. We grieve them all, and I think we can acknowledge that, and it's important that we do that. We're in really trying times right now, and one of the things that I want to focus on right now is the bipartisanship that you have had with so many members in the House, in the Senate, the relationships that you have outside of this body, because I think it's really important, because we get in the political fights all the time, and we're all trying to score points back and forth. Bipartisanship is not very sexy, but I think we need a lot more of it. So Josh Gottheimer was here today. I respect him so much. And the fact that you remain friends today is incredibly important. I noticed you also gave Joe Kennedy a shout out. So I sent him a picture I took of you from the dais because I know Joe really well as well. There are so many relationships that we have in this body, and I wish more people would see that we have those relationships, we carry them in our hearts. It means we're better people because we open our minds to listen. And to that point, I want to thank you, Mr. O'Brien, for being here as well. Because what started out as a very big difference between you and Mr. O'Brien, you found a way to both of you come together to share thoughts and ideas and turn something really good out of that discourse. And I think more people need to learn how to do that. And so to all my friends sitting here in the dais and those that are watching, is that this is how America works, where we're able to take differences and come together and not just shout at one another, but come together and figure out a way forward. That's what makes this country such an incredibly brilliant country, is that we can recognize those differences. So I want to talk a little bit about a trip that we took last year. So many folks know that you serve on armed services, I serve on armed services. We do congressional delegation visits. And a little over a year ago, or about a year ago, Senator Mullen led a congressional delegation visit into a country that had not been visited by an official delegation trip in 15 years. Along on that trip, I was also there. Chairman Smith was on this trip as well as Democrat Jimmy Panetta of California. We went to Syria. we sat down with the president there, al-Sharaa, for his first official visit from the United States of America. Now, a lot of people will say, he was a member of Al-Qaeda. What are you doing sitting down with somebody that was a member of Al-Qaeda? It's the same reason we sit down with people that we have differences with, is to find a way forward. So, Senator Mullen, I would like you to talk a little bit about that trip and why you believed it was important that we do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. You're right. The president of Syria wasn't really somebody we should have a lot of common ground with. And we actually talked about that. Him and I talked about that. Had a very blunt relationship about it. But the fact is, our world is different. And there's different leaders for different countries and different places. And you have to understand the region and the area they're in. We're not in the business of necessarily picking the leaders, but when we do, hopefully there's a way that we can work it out. And if you remember the president at the time, he said, when I was younger, I was fed a lot of propaganda. And I'm paraphrasing this. He says, but when I was in American prison in Iraq, he started looking at things different. And then he also went on to say, yes, I was affiliated with Al-Qaeda, but it's much like you guys being affiliated with Russia. It was interesting to me knowing how you went through the history. He said, it's much like you guys being affiliated with Russia and China and World War II, and look where you're at today. Sometimes in war, when we're fighting for our country, I left Iraq and came back and fought for Syria because that's my home. We have the most diverse population in the history of the world in Damascus. And I don't want the foreign influence. And after I got out, I realized my fight is for my country, not for this necessarily organization, but for me to get resources, for me to get fighters, for me to be able to fight for my country. And hopefully, even though he said openly, I never planned on being president of the country. I was just wanting to get my home back. I find myself here. And he was very open. He says, I have made mistakes. And I said, I've made mistakes too. And I said, we're not perfect, but if we can work together to be a trust but verified, he says, I want a relationship with the United States. Mm-hmm. I want to have that relationship. That's not common for somebody with Al-Qaeda ties. That's somebody that says, yes, my past is my past, but I'm looking to the future. And I think we all have past. In past, we can learn from. We can learn from successes and failures in our past. But if we can grab the past that we made a mistake on and say, yeah, that's a mistake, I'm not going to make it again, that's a lesson. That's where wisdom comes from. If you can also learn from your successes, then that's also where wisdom comes from. And that's considered someone that has the potential to be a leader. And I would rather work with those leaders like that than to continue to see the civil war that was going on, and in some cases still going on in Syria.
Yes, and thank you. And I just use this because my time has expired, just to demonstrate how we all have such significant differences. We can come from different backgrounds, but I've been on a lot of congressional delegation visits, folks, a lot in the 12 years that I've been here. But to watch Senator Mullen lead this delegation and to be able to speak to someone that is far different than we are and bring our countries that closer together, I know that he will do that with every one of us serving in Congress. I know you will represent us very well. You will represent the administration very well. You will make our country safer. So thank you, Senator Mullen. Thank you, Christy, very much for your friendship as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator, here is something I need you to understand before anything else. The Department of Homeland Security was built on the wreckage of September 11th. It exists because America decided, after nearly 3,000 people died, that it could never again afford to be caught off guard by a terrorist network operating inside its borders. That is the institutional origin of DHS. That is its founding wound. And on March 18, 2026, inside a Senate confirmation hearing, a sitting U.S. senator stood up and used a meeting with a self-admitted Al-Qaeda affiliate as the lead character witness for the man being confirmed to run that department. Not as a controversy to address, not as a complication to explain away, as a credential. Let that land for a second, because what I watched in that hearing room wasn't just political theater. It was something more specific and more dangerous than that. It was a live demonstration of how institutions get quietly hollowed out, not through scandal, not through dramatic confrontations, but through warmth, through admiration, through the comfortable language of friendship that fills a room and makes the hardest questions feel rude. Senator Ernst set the tone from the first sentence. She told Mullen she was upset the president had nominated him, not because she opposed him, but because she was losing a friend. She mentioned Josh Gottheimer, who was in the room. She talked about bipartisanship. She talked about relationships and open minds. And then she asked Mullen to talk about Syria. Now, I want you to hold two things in your head at the same time, because this is where the analysis actually lives. The first thing, what Ernst was describing, a senator leading a delegation into a country that hadn't received an official U.S. visit in 15 years, sitting down with a complicated leader, building a relationship where none existed. That is real diplomatic work. It is difficult. It matters. I am not dismissing it. The second thing, the department Mullen is being confirmed to lead maintains legal watch lists of individuals and organizations with ties to designated terrorist groups. It operates intelligence fusion centers. It coordinates with the FBI, the CIA, and foreign partners specifically to track the kind of networks that al-Sharaa was once part of. The entire operational logic of DHS runs on threat designations, evidentiary standards, and legal frameworks that exist precisely because personal judgments about who has changed are not enough. You cannot run that institution on the basis that you personally found someone's redemption story compelling. And yet that is exactly the standard Ernst applied. She asked Mullen to explain why the Syria trip mattered, and Mullen told her that al-Sharaa compared his Al-Qaeda ties to America's wartime alliances with Russia and China. And Mullen said he found that reasoning interesting. He said it showed nuance. He said it was the kind of thinking that makes someone worth working with. What Mullen described is called credential laundering. And I want to explain exactly what I mean by that because it is the mechanism underneath everything that happened in that room. Credential laundering is when you take something that would ordinarily trigger intense scrutiny, something that demands harder questions, deeper vetting, longer hearings, and you reframe it as evidence of sophistication. You don't hide the thing, you display it. But you display it through a frame that makes asking about it feel small-minded, feel provincial, feel like you just don't understand how the world actually works. Ernst did this perfectly, and I don't think she did it cynically. That's the part that matters most. She genuinely believes that Mullen's willingness to sit across from someone with a complicated past is a mark of leadership. And in certain contexts, it is. But in this context, a Senate confirmation for the head of a department whose entire mission is organized around preventing exactly the kind of networks al-Sharaa once belonged to from operating inside America, that reframe doesn't hold. It collapses under its own weight. And no one in that room pushed on it. Think about what a serious confirmation hearing looks like. You get follow-up questions, requests for classified briefings, senators asking whether the nominee discussed the visit with intelligence officials beforehand, whether DHS's formal threat assessment of al-Sharaa has been reviewed, whether views formed during that trip will influence watch list decisions going forward. None of that happened. What happened instead was that Ernst described the trip as one of the most meaningful experiences of her 12 years in the Senate. And when the language in a confirmation hearing reaches for the word meaningful before it reaches for the word accountable, you are no longer in oversight territory. You are in tribute territory. And here is why that matters to you. Not as an abstract democratic principle, but as a practical reality. The Secretary of Homeland Security sets the posture of an agency that affects millions of lives in direct, concrete ways. Decisions made inside DHS determine who gets flagged at a border crossing and who doesn't, which communities get additional scrutiny, how intelligence is prioritized, how resources are allocated across competing threats. Those decisions are shaped, whether the Secretary acknowledges it or not, by the worldview and judgment of the person at the top. When that person has publicly expressed admiration for a figure whose history the institution is legally structured to treat with extreme caution, and no one in his confirmation process asked him to explain how he squares that circle, you have a gap. Not a scandal, a gap. And gaps in institutional accountability don't stay empty. They fill with assumptions, with informal norms, with decisions that never get documented because no one established that they should be. That is how institutions drift, not with a vote, not with a dramatic hearing, with a warm room and a senator who loved a friend too much to ask the hard question. Sincerity is not oversight. Admiration is not accountability. And a confirmation hearing that produces no friction is not protecting the institution it is supposed to vet. It is performing the performance of vetting while leaving the actual work undone. The questions that weren't asked on March 18th will not disappear. They will reappear in Inspector General reports, in oversight hearings, in investigative journalism, in the slow reconstruction of what went wrong and when. Or they will be asked by no one, and the gap will simply become the new normal. That choice is not Mullen's to make. It is not Ernst's. It is Congress's. And when Congress decides that friendship is enough, that a good delegation story is enough, the institution pays the price long after the cameras have gone home. Pay attention to what comes next, because what gets normalized in a confirmation hearing doesn't stay in the hearing room. It becomes the floor.